What? Hold on, why are they pointing this out? Ever have a game series that seems up your alley, but you just never bothered playing? Star Ocean and the Tales of games have both been those for me. Now, in recent years, I've gotten a couple Tales games under my belt, and they've been super fun. Tales of Arise piqued my interest, so 100% feel free to call me a poser, but I've already started digging into more of the classics like Symphonia and Vesperia. And there's good reason why people like this series, I can see that now. Bear with me, this will relate to the video's title. Usually when I like a game, I will read about them for fun, because I don't have a good reason, I just do that. But I discovered that Namco Tales Studios was formerly known as Wolf Team, which was the developer of the first Tales game, and they had an exodus of staff who ended up becoming Tri-Ace. And wouldn't you know it, Tri-Ace made Star Ocean. They cited creative differences with the publisher and wanted to make something closer to their own vision. So why not? Let's see what they did with their freedom to make the game of their dreams. And you know what? Let's go one step further and make a spoiler-filled review of it, a long one. So long that my old mic broke while I was making this. That's right, I make the intro last. See if you can spot the places where it changes. I said spoiler though, and I mean that. I mean all the spoilers. I should warn you now, I'm gonna go deep. I'll leave chapter markers in the story timeline, but anything past this chapter is danger zone. But if you have to go, I will say my broad thoughts on the game from the outset. Star Ocean is an ambitious game full of big ideas, and it absolutely deserves a place among the classics. But like a lot of the classics, your mileage might vary depending on your patience for many things modern RPGs have smoothed out for the player. So there's your warning. Let's talk about Star Ocean. Star Ocean, as a series, always seemed way too cool for me. Allow me to explain. When I was a kid, I'd often get taken to Blockbuster. It was a weekly ritual. I was allowed to pick one game to rent, and that game would be my choice for the week. One fateful week in the winter of 1998, I picked the box for Star Ocean: The Second Story. It had everything I wanted. A cover, Enix's name on the front, and the promise of over 80 endings on the back. It was a winner, I could tell. I played about 8 hours of it, and on a fairly early difficulty spike, I was destroyed. When it came time next week to re-rent it, I moved on to something a bit easier. The game's systems felt too intricate, and the combat was just a little too fast, and most importantly, it wasn't Final Fantasy. It didn't hit any of my 12-year-old standards for gaming. But I was dumb. A dumb kid back then. I looked like someone gave a pale stick bug a bowl haircut. I wasn't ready for Star Ocean then. But I'm much bigger and somewhat smarter, so I wanted to take that journey into Star Ocean again. Now, I was going to grab Star Ocean II for this video. That was the original conceit, but finding it on modern consoles is actually impossible. While there's some other means for playing the game, wink. What did grab my eye was that the first in the series actually did get a remake on modern consoles, First Departure R. So while I'd lose a little bit of the magic of going and beating the game that beat me up as a kid, I really liked the idea of going back and seeing where the series started and maybe looking at it through an even larger lens. I'd be free of the baggage of callbacks, and I'd get to see the original idea that helped this series get a start. This remaster also promised a lot of quality and life improvements, or at least a couple. There's even rumors floating around that this game might have a run button. Pretty fancy, pretty nice. So now I invite you to sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to see what this game's all about. Oh, and again, no hard feelings, but there are spoilers, so if you don't want those, consider this your final warning. The game opens with a space captain shouting orders to a crew via anime opening cutscene. Looks like a planet named Issa is getting blown up. They don't seem to know what's blowing it up, which means I'm even more in the dark. But before we're given any context, we cut to somewhere else in the galaxy completely. This is a planet we'll discover is called Roke. Roke is an underdeveloped planet, meaning it doesn't have starships or cool technology. In fact, it's just a fantasy kingdom. Things like technology exist, but our friends here live in blissful ignorance of it. And speaking of friends, we're introduced to some of our protagonists, 3 childhood friends, Millie, Dorn, and Roddick, residents of a small village called Kratos. Our 3 heroes work as guards for their town and are meeting in their headquarters, which I think is just a house. Roddick is your typical shonen JRPG protagonist. He has blue hair and a sword, but unlike a lot of main characters of the time, he is given lines to speak. He is not a silent protagonist. Then we have Dorn, the lovable blockhead, who has a case of Brock from Pokemon Eyes something fierce. He's the doofier one. And then finally we have Millie. Millie's most dominant trait is that she is nice, which fits very nicely into the trope of being a healer. The other remarkable thing about Millie, though, is that her tail matches her hair, which I guess is a good time to mention all three of them have tails. You see, residents of Roke are called Fellpools, which seem to be human in every way except they have pointy elf ears and what looks like a prehensile tail. All three of them reside here in the country with their friends and family living a quiet life. But of course the game is started, so that's about to get shaken up. Or this is a farming sim. I guess we'll find out. Nope, bandits are attacking. So I guess that means it's time to get to know our battle system. This is nothing out of the ordinary if you played an action RPG like this one before. But if you haven't, I'll do a high-level overview. You begin every battle in a small arena where you and your enemies can move about freely. Inside this space, you're fighting with the enemies in the encounter. You have a standard attack button and 2 special moves mapped to your shoulder buttons. Your special attacks will be shouted by your team, so brace yourself for that. If this is your first anime action RPG or you aren't sure what that sounds like, then maybe give this a listen. Now, if what you heard was painful to you physically, then I should warn you, you might not like this game, or you could always play your battles muted. The system isn't all attacks though. Some characters can use symbology, which just means spells, with the bigger spells having a dramatic effect on screen, but more on magic later. The main strategy in fights for a lot of the game is to not allow enemies to get on either side of you. If you do, they will stun lock you. Something the AI is very excited to try and get involved in. You see, your allies charge into death. They love it. They can't get enough. I don't understand why. Thankfully, that's only on their default AI settings. You can fine-tune those in the menu, and I recommend you look through those options and find one that makes them a little less stupid. It's not a very robust system for managing your party, but it helps. Well, we clean up the bandit issue by doing some murder, and nobody seems thankful or even as shocked as I'd like. I guess the town isn't that quiet. Honestly, everyone's pretty fast to go back to their business. Roddick even seems a little bored. Maybe he's a sociopath. But instead we'll chalk this up to the Rokian attitude on bandits is weird. Complicated, that's a good word. It's complicated. Fast forward to the next morning, and word reaches our small village that there's a disease turning people into stone in the neighboring town of Cool. That sounds not good. Maybe 3 plucky teens should go check it out. Ellie seems to think some herbs from Mount Maytorx will help, but wouldn't you know it, that place has got a real bad monster problem. And that's irrelevant, because it turns out Ellie's father is the town doctor. And he makes the very valid point that a doctor might be more helpful than 3 plucky teens. I get that, and in fact, you know what? I trust Ellie's dad implicitly now. There's no way we'll need to do anything about any of this later. He's got it. Time skipped to 2 days later, and a message arrives. Dorn receives it from a carrier pigeon and reads to our team. As it turns out, the disease in Cool is beyond fixing, at least with traditional medicine. Ellie's dad warns them not to come, and that even contact with anyone who's had the disease will turn them to stone. This means that while his intentions were good, he himself has contracted this disease. Of course, Ellie, loving her father, goes off to save him. Well, I guess check on him more accurately, and we follow suit. It's here that we get our first glimpse of the city of Cool, which is not in a great way at the moment. While Kratos has more of a flat meadowland sort of look, Cool has a stepped terraced kind of look. It would be hustling and bustling if it wasn't for the fact that all of its residents were made out of stone. It's here that we find Ellie's dad, who is already succumbing to the disease.
Father.
I am done for, Millie.
And you won't let me sit by your side, Father? I can't even hold your hand.
Ellie has found her father, but she can't even get near him. The only thing he can do is tell her to keep her distance, even though she just wants to be with her father. This is a really hard scene. It does a really good job of setting up the stakes of this disease that will act largely as a catalyst for our whole adventure. Something that spreads this easily and kills is an existential threat and a really scary one. The solution here, of course, is to go get the herbs, which her dad expressly forbids, but are we gonna listen? No way. Mount Maytorx may be filled with dangerous monsters, but we gotta save everybody. So after some back and forth, our party decides to ascend the mountain in order to find the herbs, which means we're gonna have to fight some monsters. One of the enemies on the mountain is a worm that will lay eggs on your clothes if you're not careful, so despite being incredibly peaceful, I'd say Roke is kinda gross. Mostly though, it's a pretty linear path up to the top of this mountain. Dorn keeps stopping to catch his breath and it's really annoying. Hey Dorn, come on bud, keep up. Oh no, it turns out that Dorn does have the stone disease. Apparently even touching the letter that delivered the news gave it to Dorn. But the good news is we are at the peak of the mountain and we can almost see the herbs. We round the corner and humans beam in from space? Is it a boss fight? No. Unless you count a lot of expository dialogue in a small window a boss fight, in which case, here comes a boss fight. The two space invaders introduce themselves as Ronix and Elia, human beings from the planet Earth. And they are friendly, they're not here to kill us. Oh, and that stone disease? Herbs aren't going to cure that, because it's actually a biological weapon that's been unleashed on our planet. What a fun, happy thing to find out. Apparently, thanks to a planet called Lazonia, who is currently in conflict with Earth, they need to either have us go back to being blissfully unaware and dying of a disease, or join them in space. They have a law that says since we're a more primitive planet, they have to follow the Underdeveloped Planet Preservation Act. I guess Prime Directive was taken. I don't know why I decided to make a Star Trek joke. I bet you can't wait to see what other similarities to that beloved series I found, though. But the bad news is, I know exactly this one connection. In fact, the whole game sort of fills me with a pang of longing that I know relatively nothing about Star Trek, because I'm gonna guess you can find through lines if you know anything about the series. I feel like it's a smart people show, which is maybe why I haven't watched it. Outside of carrying around an admittedly troubling knowledge of trivia for video games, there's quite a few bits of pop culture that I find myself very blind to. I thought Ariana Grande was a Starbucks order until 2 months ago. So while it might be ripe for parody or even bringing up, please excuse my lack of Star Trek knowledge. Back to the story, Ronix and Elia provide them with a fair warning that they can't go back to their friends if they open up the Pandora's box that is their Earthling technology. This moment has a lot of gravity, but the decision is a pretty clear one. If they can help with the cure, they'll save many lives. Even if it means you don't get to see home again, wouldn't it be worth it to save Dorn? More largely speaking, curing this disease means putting their personal lives on hold to save the lives of the people who could catch this insanely contagious disease. Roddick gives a short speech about saving everyone, and that's really enough for Ilya and Ronix, so we're beamed into space. As soon as we're on board the ship, we get Dorn into a cool future med bay. The doctor aboard the ship needs some time to work on sci-fying him up a cure. If anyone can do it, it's him. Wow. Huh. Oh, we tour the ship and get a little fish out of water stuff from Ellie and Roddick as they explore all the floors of the ship. It's nice to see a JRPG where we can explain things to the protagonist like a child without leaning on amnesia. Sorry, JRPG bingo card holders, there's no amnesia space today. After our tour, we're told by the doctor that they cannot synthesize a cure. There's some pseudoscience to back this up, but if we could find the source of the pathogen that made the disease, we might be able to reverse engineer a cure. So Dorn is still turning to stone. On a brighter note, we discover that the disease actually doesn't kill your cells. You can be cured even if you get really stoned. Become stoned. Yeah. We just gotta ask the Lazonians about where they got it. Luckily, a Lazonian ambassador is gonna head to Earth soon, so we can ask them then. I guess the war effort isn't going super great and they're ready to start peace talks. All we ask is that we let Dorn go home as a statue before we head out to be representatives for the planet Roke during these negotiations. So Dorn is warped incredibly accurately into his bed. I'm talking fully tucked in. After we tell him we'll find a cure and he goes full stone, we're back to space. We meet with the Lazonian ambassador who explains that there's someone manipulating their side of the war, and they gave them the biological weapon. The faction who gave them the weapon destroyed the planet in the intro too, so they're not nice. They're referred to as the mysterious but ultimately underwhelmingly named Third Party. And this third party used the blood of something called the Archdemon to engineer the virus. Real icky stuff. But now we know the cause, so all we have to do is find ourselves a good old Archfiend. Roddick recognizes this name. The Archfiend was a villain on their planet 300 years ago who was destroyed, so unless they have a time machine, which they don't, it doesn't look like they're going to be able to get a cure. So the Admiral decides to quarantine the planet. It's a real pickle. So Ronix, Ilya, Ellie, and Roddick all meet to discuss the situation, and it turns out, never mind. There's a time travel gate, apparently, on the planet Styx. Alright, well that's convenient. Troublingly, they're not sure if they fully even understand what the gate is about. It has an otherworldly entity that guards it, determining if your request to go back in time is worthy of its attention. But maybe this'll work. Ronix sneaks aboard his own ship using masterful subterfuge.
I didn't hear any deployment orders, Captain.
Well, I have. Let us through.
and we're off to the time gate to ask for permission. When we arrive, it turns out the time gate is totally down with the idea. What a cool gate! However, time gate rules, trademark, says you can't bring weapons back in time. Other than that though, the gate is picking up what we're putting down, so we rush into the time gate and Ilya slips. But don't worry, because Roddick's there to catch her, like a monkey-tailed little gentleman. So they still get through the gate, but just a split second later. Surely this short delay won't have unknown consequences for the first 10 hours of our adventure? Star Ocean is now a story about space travel and time travel, but it also turns out not really about time travel at all. Let me explain. Time travel, as a concept, is a slippery one. Every time you think you have a grasp on it, there's so many more tiny things that can pop a hole in your narrative. Star Ocean fails horribly as a narrative that would stand up to any of the scrutiny about telling a time travel story, but it doesn't really try to explain it. The game is probably less interested in the logistics of time travel than I have been so far. Honestly, it seems to exist as a way to have our characters ask questions about the world that the audience would, and it not seem strange. That's why amnesia is so common in JRPGs and really all games. For fantasy, you need a reason for everyone to explain their culture to you, and it looks like time travel is it for this game. For the sake of my own sanity, I'm going to take Star Ocean fully at face value that their time travel works. So, with that out of the way, we're now 300 years in the past, and Ilya's clothes won't work in this timeline. She's going to stand out real bad. I assume in the future everyone has cool gamer LEDs on. I have no idea why Roddick's clothes would work too, but no, I said I would take it at face value. So Roddick agrees to go to town and ask for some clothes, and while they all look the same on Ilya's character sprite, some outfits are going to make her happier than others. This is a good time to talk about the secret stat running in the background of Star Ocean. Affection ratings. There are choices in the game that you can make that kind of seem innocuous, but they're actually changing the way the characters react to you later. So when you enter a town, you have the option of entering it with private actions instead. This sounds really odd, but basically it means that your group splits up and all spreads out among the town. This way you can interact with them like you could any regular NPC in a village or town. Through these conversations, you can increase your affection rating with your teammates, but more importantly, you get a little bit of their backstory and motivation, which is severely lacking from the core story, at least for the non-essential characters. The higher these ratings go, the more it can affect how you relate to that character and how your epilogue with them will go. So for example, if I make Ilya very happy throughout our adventure, she might call me a cool dude at the end. Keep in mind no one in my real life has called me a cool dude, so this would be a great opportunity to explore what that feels like. Anyway, affection rating is one of several subsystems this game has running under the hood. We'll be covering more as the video goes along, and don't worry Star Ocean fans, I have not forgotten about crafting. I gotta find the right moment, and I'm not dreading explaining it at all. In fact, I'm really excited. So now Ilya has cool new clothes and our adventure can start in earnest. We travel north to the town of Hot, which in Roddick's day was Cool.
Oh, okay, I see what you did there.
You'll remember Cool is the place where everyone used to be stoned. It's a little bit confusing, but thankfully this is the last time we have to deal with a place having a different name in the past. It's here we meet the hothead Cius, who likes boozing and being a real guy about stuff. A real manly guy. He's got a chip on his shoulder for reasons yet unknown, and he's the first recruitable character in the game. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about how the recruiting system works, but Cius agrees to help us with the conundrum we have. You see, in order to get one town over, we have to make a deal with a local merchant to get a pass. The pass will unlock the boating system, which will be nice to get to other continents to continue our search for Ronix and Millie, who don't seem to be in this town at all. I don't know how the time gate really operates, but it really flung them far away. The merchant's a real jerk about it and says we don't look experienced enough to take the job, so we need to bring someone experienced with us. Thankfully, Cius agrees to help. He's a manly guy, and we're off to Mount Maytorx. We remember that place. Got to keep its name, that's good. Does it still have the worms that lay eggs on your clothes? Yes. Even better, yeah, I love that. This time, instead of just reaching the peak though, we have to cross completely over the mountain to the northern port of Portmouth, which, incredibly aptly named. Good job guys, that's a good name for this place. Portmouth is one of the many hustling and bustling port towns in the game. We make our way to our quest marker, and sure enough, this guy has a gift that we need to take back over the mountain. It's a rabbit. It's a rabbit showing feet. Hey, we don't judge, we just do the job we're asked to do. So it's back over the mountain again, but this time the other direction. And don't worry, the worms are still there, laying their eggs and living their best life. We deliver foot rabbits safely to the hands of the merchant as requested. The pass is ours. Foot rabbit may be a statue, but it seems to have life figured out. Doesn't have to walk around, we carried it, like barefoot royalty across a mountain. Once we're done, Sia says see you later, and we're given the option to have him join us. This choice seems really small on the surface, and the obvious answer is yes, since he's an additional party member, so I did it. It's here though that I should mention I decided to go into character recruitment blind. But to give that a little context, I'm going to explain that system really quickly first. Star Ocean has a total of 8, kinda 9 recruitable characters in the game in addition to your main 4. The party, however, is capped at 8, so every playthrough you can only bring 4 of those characters with you. You can even recruit no characters if you want to just play with the core team, although I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you were on a hard mode run. So everything I have on this playthrough might look a lot different than yours, but all that aside, I didn't know that and I picked Sius. That created a crazy domino effect I didn't see coming, but here we go. Ignorance is bliss, and we're off with our new booze-loving friend to Portmouth. Again, more like Mortmouth, because we're seeing more of it. I'm so sorry. So we're back in Portmouth, we have a pass, and we're ready to go. No problem, right? Wrong. Portmouth has 2 things of note. Good booze, according to Sius, and a pirate problem. That means they can't take us one continent over to keep looking for our friends unless we charitably murder all the pirates for them. I'm so glad we went through the trouble of getting that pass, and we're not angry about that extra task at all. Our party, clearly enraged from having our time wasted, elects to go murder all the pirates personally. That's not a problem, they love that idea, so they let us go. We take a little boat to their cave hideout. The cave dungeon is pretty unremarkable. It does the usual maze with encounters approach that's pretty par for the course with the era. We're able to learn a trick to set things on fire and open a door, but sadly this mechanic isn't used again for any other dungeons. There's a not all that tough boss that we quickly dispatch and find out he's been keeping a prisoner, a spazzy cat girl. So of course we rescue her, and she has a portrait, so JRPG law states that any character with a character portrait is highly important. With the pirates gone, we're given the courtesy of teleporting directly back to town, and oh, there goes the cat girl. Well, friend gone. Unnerving and insane exit aside, we can now go to the next continent. We sail to the port town of Otanim, and the rumor around town is the nearest big city, Astral, is a good place to look for our friends. But before we can get into Astral City, we have to hike to the arena town of Tatroy. They have a cave that connects up into the city of Astral. Being adventurous, I chose to do a couple arena fights because you can't say no to an arena. And seeing the combat 1v1 shows some parts of the battle system that might get a little overlooked when your party is mobbing the opponents with their abilities. A lot of fights in the game devolve into spamming A for battles below your level, not 1v1 though. You need a little more spatial awareness. Solo arena's fun, but the more I win, the more Roddick starts to remind me of my wife for reasons I don't want to get into.
Huh? It's over? Wish they could have lasted longer. That was way too fast.
So we'll just move along to Astral Castle. In order to get up to Astral, however, we have to go through a cave. This cave is really unremarkable, but had some really good EXP grinding spots, including one where you could heal back to full health, so I did catch a couple levels here. Once we reach Astral, we find out that we're actually in Sius' hometown, and the hero of it, Lord Lias, is his dad. And he was going to be a member of the city guard, maybe even captain. We learn all of this from the new captain, Fia, who has very choice things to say about him.
You can't believe in anything, so you decided to betray everyone. I'll never forgive you for it.
Ooh, tough break, buddy. I don't think she likes you. We still like you, though. You're our boozing bro. Without you, who's gonna drink in town? We'll come to find out that Sius' father commands a lot of respect because he was a hero in the Demon Wars. Wars fought against the archdemon, Asmodeus, many years ago when he first tried to invade the mortal world. They pushed him back then, but he's back now, I guess, because you know how demon lords are. They don't ever, unless you really kill them. They're so stubborn. We'll find out Sius decided to leave the guard because he was worried he was chosen for his role based on nepotism and not his own skill. He doesn't want to go back to the job until he becomes strong enough to make his father proud. However, strong enough to make his father proud seems very loosely defined, but I recruited him and now I have to stick with him, so even if he doesn't know what he's doing, you know what? He's all right. He's okay. Look at him. He's so happy. We ask around, and wouldn't you know it, no one has seen Millie or Ronix here either. They are still alive, right? Maybe they already killed Asmodeus. Maybe they're looking for us. Shouldn't one of us sit stark still? Shouldn't we have had a contingency plan for this? Why am I asking so many questions? We have to keep looking. So our party rests the night in Astral since we have to go to another continent the next day to keep looking for our friends. And it seems like there's a commotion in the night. Turns out Fia wasn't just rude, she was planning on stabbing Lord Leus. This is a really odd choice since she was real into him last time we saw him. In fact, she praised him, but we chase her down.
You and I are friends, aren't we?
Who the hell are you?
Some quick questions later, and Cius knows immediately that this isn't Fia. This is a spider lady pretending to be Fia. And the imposter was too nice. That was the clue. The imposter was nice to him, and he was like, no, ew, Fia's never been nice to me. The real Fia joins us, and we have to go chase this imposter down. But wouldn't you know it, she ran into the caves we just came through. But if we don't catch her, there'll be no way to prove Fia innocent.
You guys are obstinate.
We track down the monster and behead it to prove our innocence. I guess showing a monster head's how you prove you're innocent in Astral. It doesn't really make any sense, but it does answer a lot of questions about why Cius behaves the way he does. A little bit of Fia's cold exterior from earlier comes down and reveals a character is in fact very honor-bound and especially fond of Lord Leus. In fact, she's basically Cius's adopted sister. She informs Cius that their dad misses him, but he's still not ready to face his father. And a certain someone he's traveling with seems like a good swordsman he could learn from. Wink! Fia understands somewhat and bids him a farewell, but before she goes, she leaves our party with a hint. Turns out there's a ruin left by an ancient advanced race. This ancient race's ruins are in a place called the Purgatorium, and they have an item called the Eye of Truth that will let you see what you're looking for. Well, that would be incredibly convenient, so we're gonna head that way. The last hint we are given is that it has a hidden entrance, and we are off up the mountains to figure out what the Purgatorium's all about. When you arrive at the Purgatorium, you're going to realize very quickly that the entrance that you went through that's very shiny and pretty is not in fact where you need to be. This one here, totally fake. That didn't stop me from wandering around in it for a good 15 to 20 minutes. Rather, when you find the actual entrance, you'll do it by rubbing against the mountain like a cat rubs against a leg for attention. Once the mountain leg has deemed you worthy, you will notice the load into the new screen and you are in. And it's here that we meet Joshua, Ayashua, Yashua.
My name is Yoshua.
Yes, of course. He's a featherfolk, which means he has cool wings and he's on a search for his sister. He's been separated from her when their parents were killed by a knight known as Crimson Shield when they were kids. So we join forces with Yoshua because he wants to use the eye to find his sister. And honestly, I don't suppose there's a use limit on the thing, so why not have more help? Yoshua was immediately a helpful member of the party because he has curative spells, meaning I didn't have to stop the action to heal my all melee party constantly. It is wonderful. Speaking of wonderful, the Purgatorium is the first dungeon in the game to break from the mold of maze with high encounter rate and some treasures and dead ends. It is definitely the high watermark for dungeons at this point. In order to progress here, we need to touch the correct delicious looking floor gumdrops to proceed. So for example, if I touch the blue floor gumdrop, I will teleport to the matching blue floor gumdrop in the room. Different rooms mix up what different gumdrops do, but essentially you're looking to match the correct one in each room you go to. It is both delicious and a puzzle. Not a particularly hard puzzle, but I enjoyed the change of pace. A few instances of this and we find our way to the main chamber. Here we fight some ghost wolves, and we are let into the Purgatorium's temple at the end. Elia remarks that the place seems to be technologically advanced, and she doesn't seem to be very wrong. Something fishy's going on in Roke. Oh right, and there are 3 non-corporeal ghost ladies that live here. They immediately pin us for not belonging in their timeline. It's a bit rude, but it is true. So it turns out they don't have an eye of truth to show us. However, they can locate our friends since they can sense that they are out of time like we are. The only catch is they want us to get the heck out once they do tell us because they want their privacy. I get it, we'll respect your privacy. The non-corporeal Sky Ladies seem to know more than they're letting on, but a deal's a deal. As it happens, Ronix and Ellie are located in some place with leaves. Apparently they're with a third presence that's not correctly in time, so that's a little troubling. Cius immediately tells us that this is called the Land of Van, where the monsters are tough, and they probably have booze. Yoshua is in a bit of a bind though because they can't find people who are supposed to belong in this timeline. Tough luck, my winged friend. We exit the dungeon, and once outside, we're given the choice to part ways with Yoshua. Healing magic, an interesting backstory, and he makes a good compliment to the team. So of course I told him not to join us. Hear me out. I'm not looking for his sister, and I don't know what weird esoteric things I would have had to have done in order to get her. So if I had made a mistake at some point and I couldn't get her, I thought it would kind of screw up my storyline. I stood by my decision. Also, I just wanted to change it up, right? Like I said yes to the last guy, let's say no to this guy. I'm stumbling because I'm in the future, and we're going to find out I made a mistake very shortly. So now all that's left is to walk to the city of Trop, which is a port town, which will take us to the city of Ekdart, which is another port town on the continent of Van. Easy enough. Except for the moment you step foot into Trop, you see a huge flash in the sky, and the celestial ship crashes down near Hod.
The celestial ship? What's that?
Of course, this means you're walking back to see what that's all about first. So it turns out Roddick knew that 300 years ago, an object that they call in modern day the celestial ship had wrecked into the planet. The ruins were long gone and overgrown by the time Roddick was alive. However, here in time, we are there for the day it actually hits the surface. So we walk all the way back to Hot, the second town in the game, and outside of the village is the wreckage. Someday we truly will find Ronix and Millie. They are definitely characters in the game. We arrive, and wouldn't you know, it's a spaceship. One that Ilya remarks to herself seems similar to Earth's ships in many ways. Everyone talks for a bit and agrees that this is probably the third party the Lizonians mentioned at the beginning of the game. That means they're here to take that Asmodeus blood too. So what were we doing again? Oh right, it is time to walk back through 2 continents, no fast travel, to the city of Trop. There we can finally leave for the continent of Van. Oh Millie and Ronix, I hope you guys are waiting for us. Well, the game knows I must be running short on patience here because they immediately show me Millie. But wouldn't you know it, our Princess Ronix is in another castle, and he's with some lady named Mavelle. According to Millie, this Mavelle lady's a real anime babe.
Brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping, spectacular, never the same, totally unique.
Ilya's pretty jealous about this, so we might be on the way to a spicy love triangle. Ooh. Honestly though, I had no idea Ilya was into Ronix, but I guess this is one way to find out. I mean, look at Ronix, I understand what she sees. Ronix is in the city of Ionis, which is thankfully a very short walk from Ekdart. Once we arrive, we immediately see both him and Mavelle. They're confronting someone named Crimson Shield. Why does that sound so familiar?
I can't get it out of my mind. That overwhelming sense of doom. That shield with the crimson seal. There couldn't be more than one of those in the world.
Oh, right. The encounter with Crimson Shield is brief, and after he leaves the scene, we find out Mavelle's family was killed by him. This is probably starting to sound a little familiar, as this is definitely Yoshua's lost sister. So, of course, after all of that, moments away from where I heartlessly abandoned Yoshua, we find out that it wasn't hard to find his sister, and she's right here. Now, for a lot of convoluted reasons, she explains she's in a different body, that's why she doesn't have wings. We don't have to worry too much about the logistics of this, as the entire storyline is relegated to the B-plot of these two, and it won't be explored in this playthrough. If you haven't played the game and you're deciding you want to though, I would definitely pick these two in my playthrough because they get a lot of interesting stuff. But unfortunately, we don't present Mavelle with a good reason to stay as we abandon poor, innocent Yoshua. So she leaves. So no spicy love triangle for us, and Mavelle, I don't think Ilya is gonna miss you. So all the main characters are reunited, and after a whopping 10 hours apart, we get a nice cutscene of everyone blowing off a little bit of steam and catching up with one another. They all go to the tavern and have a drink. There's some fun character moments in here, and I was especially fond of Ilya out drinking Cius. Thinking on it though, of course she could. He's using a sword like a coward, while Ilya has been punching monsters to death with her bare hands. She's kind of a badass. Now, I really appreciate it when JRPGs take time to give a little bit of levity to their storytelling. Not every game in the genre does this great, Sometimes they follow up grim portents with a hot spring scene, but if you do it right, it really makes for some wonderful character building. And while the genre as a whole falls into a lot of tropes, it's these interpersonal character-focused moments that keep them elevated above those cliches. You really get to know the characters, and as a result, you root for them to win against all odds. And likely kill God, because it's a JRPG, so it's a safe bet that they're going to kill a god at some point. Cut to the next day, and the drinking is over. The harsh rays of the sun greeting our cast likely hungover eyes. Ronix and Millie joining means our team now has offensive and healing spellcasters in the mix, so the battle dynamics change up a little bit. The AI will play spellcasters in a very specific and odd way. They sort of just tuck into a corner and spam spells. In all honesty, it works fine, just so long as you keep the enemies off of them. It adds a nice layer to the preceding battles, but it does kind of come with a catch. You see, big spells will get movies. Now, this is pretty cool, so I don't want to disparage it too much, and against a boss fight it's very epic, but let's say it's a level 2 monster you bumped into because you're backtracking. Elemental lightning from the heavens themselves is overkill in that case. Now, to be fair, you can turn the big spells off and on in the character status screen, but I found that to be a little bit more work than it was worth, because you had to turn them back on for boss fights. So in my case, I ended up letting all the spell movies play out anyway. But with that out of the way, Ronix has gathered a lot of valuable information for our group. It seems the King of Van is recruiting adventurers to help in the battle against the archfiend Asmodeus. It seems the further north you go in this world, the more people are feeling the effects of him, but I, on the other hand, had nearly forgotten he existed at this point because we spent so much time looking for our friends. But you better believe we're here for that good archfiend pathogen, and we're gonna get it. We make a long journey to the royal city of Van, and it's quite a hike. Now, to this point, I'm not sure if I've stressed how slow traversal is, but this game has some very slow land travel, especially on the world map. There's a dash button in the remaster, and while I can't imagine the game without it, it's still pretty slow. The high encounter rate doesn't do this a lot of favors either, but it certainly makes this section seem very perilous, which is what I guess they were going for. All that aside, we finally arrive in Van. This is a fortified castle city, and perhaps the biggest city we've seen so far. It has a really royal air to it. There's some real majesty to the place. Big stone architecture and stairways fill the city. We go to meet the king, because honestly, people aren't lining up to fight someone called the Archfiend, it turns out. So if you say you're interested, well, then you're the kind of crazy or brave that they're looking for. The king asks if we're able to defeat the Archfiend, and we say, maybe, which for some reason he really likes.
I like the cut of your jib.
What's a jib?
Promote that man.
Andy intends to give us the go-ahead to kick some Archfiend butt. But there's a catch. To ensure that we're up to the task, we must go into the castle's basement to do spooky castle basement stuff. Seriously though, we are led down into the castle's basement where a trial dungeon is just hanging out. It's implied this was used to test ancient heroes of yore, but like, this is a weird thing to keep in the castle if you're not using it any longer. Get it renovated, put in a hot tub or a pool table. This is a lot of good space. This wall, it doesn't even look load-bearing. I bet you could knock this down, get an open concept in here, it would do wonders for the place. Fresh coat of paint? No one will know this was a trial dungeon. But it really does work out for this particular instance, so who's laughing now? I guess it's the king. Thankfully, this castle basement dungeon trial is a very short one. For the most part, it's just a maze, but it does have one little unique puzzle involving phases of the moon. Another thing worth noting here is there are some mean spellcasters in this dungeon who will abuse the paralyze and stone status ailments. It can result in a full party wipe if you're not careful. Despite some frustrations though, I really did like how it made me rethink battles, and this is going forward from here on out. You need to aim for that back line or the powerful spellcasters will take out your team with a vengeance. Outside of those things, however, this dungeon is over incredibly quickly, and we get the king's approval for passing his trial. The king's now feeling like he can trust our heroism a little more, so he starts to lay out the next course of action for our team. The Archfiend lives in the Demon Realm, which is a separate realm that can't be entered by humans. So while the Archfiend can open exits and drop off evil, chaos, cold DoorDash, any of those things, it's impossible for us to enter the other way. Back when the original Demon Wars were fought, the Kingdom of Moi had technology that was left behind by their ancestors that allowed them to enter the Demon Realm in order to fight back. Once the war ended, they deemed this technology too powerful, so they split the knowledge of how it works amongst all the kings of the land, each getting an individual part of the prophecy. We now need to go visit the other 3 kings to get their part of the story. Once they give us their section of the story, we will get one of their royal seals and move on to the next. Once we collected all the parts, the King of Van will give us his 4th and final part, and that should create a complete picture for how to defeat the Archfiend. In order to make this happen, the king gives us his royal seal so that we can be granted an audience with the other kings. This will let him know we're legit. Hi there, it's me, Future Cody. Just stopping in real quick to say that I know that they're called emblems and not seals, but I went through all the trouble of making these seals. I photoshopped a little crown on them. I spent at least 2 minutes finding the perfect PNG to pop on their little beautiful dainty heads, and to be honest, I don't want to go back. I love this too much. I'm going to keep this joke. But also you need to know I'm not going to say royal seal again because I've already fixed that. I already did it, but this joke, I did this joke in recording and I like it too much. It's here that the game's pace turns into a bit of a gooey puddle. Before this, we were rewarded with the joys of exploring new places and getting to see new things, but this quest essentially means we need to go back and revisit all the major capitals we've stopped in on our way to get here. If I were to guess, lots of folks probably drop off here because the backtracking is made much worse by the incredibly high encounter rate coupled with weak enemies. You see, as we backtrack, the same low-level enemies will be waiting for us, so they serve as more of a time-wasting nuisance than anything else. It takes longer to load the fights in and out than it does to actually beat the monsters themselves. It also doesn't help if the AI is going nuts with high-level spells and making you watch Ronix unleash the fury of Poseidon on a level 2 bandit for 45 seconds.
Thundercloud!
But like I said earlier, that problem is born of my laziness. The progress is just too slow across the overworld. They really could have used a boat or an airship here. Even 1987's Final Fantasy offered you an airship to help with this. To be fair, there is an alternative transit mode, but it's late in the game and it's tied to a very optional character, so not everyone will experience the joys of it. But I will, and more on that later. The time for being grumpy about backtracking is past. The time for actually doing backtracking and side quests has begun. While the game's world map is a little barren compared to some of the best the genre has to offer, we can take this time to get some levels in side dungeons and recruit new optional companions. Is there a better feeling than getting a new character in a JRPG? I remember when I was a kid, when games came with instruction manuals, I would turn the pages and breathlessly read about all the characters listed inside. I would wonder about what meeting them might be like. It was very exciting. Seriously, it's still one of my favorite things to do in JRPGs. It's making friends. Wow. I can't get over how sad that sounds saying it out loud, but it's very cool to build your ensemble cast. Our first stop to grab an emblem will be Astral, and after a quick meeting with the king, he lets us know his part of the clue and hands over his emblem, no strings attached. I guess he felt bad that we had to walk all the way without quick travel to him. While we're here, we can ask Fia to join us as well, so of course I made sure to pick her up. She was pretty helpful against that spider lady who pretended to be her, and she has cool dual blades. She's the whole package. I'm a little disappointed there wasn't more interaction between her and Cius going forward, but it's really nice to have a good melee character on the team. Next, we're heading back to the Moa continent for the Moa emblem. Before we meet with the king here, we're going to go all the way back to Krat, the first town we visited in this time. There's a cat here. Hey, you remember that cat girl we rescued from the pirates? Well, that was Chekhov's cat girl. Originally, when she said her unhinged thing and ran off, she dropped an ocarina. If you didn't pick it up, you can't recruit this character, but I did. So obviously now we play the ocarina for this house cat. And it turns into Perichi. It's never explained why she can transform into a cat, but it seems her race on this planet, the Lesser Fellpool, can just do this? I'm still not 100% sure. The act of recruiting her is absolutely obtuse and not remotely clear. And in the interest of being transparent, I absolutely used a guide to figure this out. I cannot imagine a reality where I just thought to try that. So now, lucky us, we have Perichi on our team. Perichi is a spunky cat girl who serves as a bit of comic relief. She dresses in a skimpy leotard because anime, but that's fine because she's... No, thank you. Now, on paper, Perichi should be a really annoying character. She's loud and says weird things, but I found myself very charmed. Her voice actress, Allison Packard, does a good job despite having her voice direction summed up as sort of shout everything. And even though she's shouting, her character really comes through thanks to her voice work. This will be a good point to highlight something that you might have noticed and are maybe typing an angry comment about as I speak. I am playing the dub. I know many people can be, we'll say, troublingly insistent on saying you should play your game subtitled to keep your experience pure to the original vision. But I'm playing this game with the idea that I'll be applying at least somewhat of a critical approach, so while the sub might sound nice or even actually be better, me not being able to speak the language prevents me from knowing the voice performance is any good. So hopefully this does something to quell your rage about me playing with a dub. The English voice cast for this game actually has some pretty talented folks on board too, including but not limited to the ever-present Yuri Lowenthal as Roddick, Bryce Papenbrook, who played Dorn, you might recognize as the voice of Kurito in Sword Art Online. And Allison, who I just mentioned, also did a great job as Neon Red in the speedrunning platformer Neon White. All the voice acting in this game will range from serviceable to stiff and robotic, sometimes in the exact same sentence. I would guess this has a lot to do with this being a PSP game. It probably didn't have the budget for a lot of studio time, and all things considered, I'd say this cast had a couple standout performances. But for the most part, you can feel the budget sort of dragging down a lot of the line deliveries. Voice acting aside, we now have 7 of our 8 characters recruited, and we're off to grab the Moi emblem before we recruit our final one. The Moi capital city is located in Portmouth, the port city from earlier that had a pirate problem. I also neglected to mention they have a whole castle here, but we weren't allowed in back then, so I forgot to mention it. However, now we have a cool pass from the King of Van, they would love to have us in, so we get to talk to the King of Moi's assistant and show him our cool collection of emblems, and they're impressed. So impressed that they ask us to clean out their basement of monsters for them before we can even meet the king. Now, the more keen Star Ocean fans in the room might know 2 things about this basement. 1, I'm here a little early and this is going to be tough, I'll need to grind. And 2, it has potential for crafting shenanigans, which I think means it's time I dive a little deeper into crafting. Ooh, I'm sure I can make this easy and concise to explain. Crafting is a big deal in Star Ocean. The original Super Famicom cartridge had more memory than most all others of the era, and while this was to support the weird, crispy voice acting you could get on cartridges back then, good luck. I feel like the rest of it had to have been dedicated to the logistical web that is crafting in Star Ocean. According to the wiki for the game, the cartridge contained 48 megabits of data, so to put that into perspective, Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI were only 32. Star Ocean went big, and crafting is no exception. Now, thanks to the success of Minecraft, I'd argue almost every modern game seems to find a way to put some kind of crafting into its core loop. The kids, they go crazy for crafting, and as a result, most developers have found ways to forcibly cram crafting into some portion or another of their game, sometimes much to my dismay. This makes it earnestly hard for me to judge how unique this system must have been for Star Ocean at the time, just because it's so ubiquitous now. And while it's a little rough around the edges here, the sheer scope and size of the system really provides literal hours of item combinations to explore. There's a lot of meat on this bone. But let me take a step back and explain how crafting works. After battles, in addition to money and experience, you'll also receive SP, skill points. Skill points are the currency used to unlock skills, but each character also has certain innate talents that might make them a better fit for a particular skill. So let me elaborate with an example. Let's say we want to teach Ilya how to write and perform music. That would be an insane thing to say in a lot of JRPGs, but here that's just something we do. We can see on her status screen, Ilya has music sense and listening, which would make her a very good fit for any musically based skills. So if you then go spend skill points on performance and music knowledge, you'll acquire levels in the music specialty. A specialty is not a skill, but unlocked with enough levels put into the corresponding skills. The more you level the corresponding skills, the more effective they'll be. So if I get performance to level 3 and music knowledge to level 3, then I would be overall level 3 in the music specialty. I'll give you a second to go get a pen to write all this down because there will be a quiz on it. Let's say you want to learn the song The Devil's Aria. Of course you do. It can be used to cheese encounters for leveling up. Great, that sounds great. First we're going to need to compose it. Right, and to compose it we're going to need an instrument, so we better go buy one. Let's say a trumpet. Now, we need somewhere to write down our lovely compositions, so we'll need to buy a bunch of feather pens from the shop. Now we can get rolling. We're going to spam the compose skill until we either run out of pens and need more, or we compose the song we're looking for. You see, composing is a dice roll, with higher levels more likely to provide success. It might take one try, but it might take 10, so you have to see how RNG is feeling today. Oh yes, and the pins will break. People in this world write really hard, so only one pin per composition, even if you mess up. Now, once we've learned it, we can finally enjoy the fruits of our labor, but before you can play that song, you better pick up a pile of conductor's batons because you're gonna need that as your consumable to play music. Yes, you see, we'll need to perform it once we write it. The pin was for composing, not playing. No one in the world of Star Ocean is gentle, and this performance will of course destroy the baton every single use. They go hard, they're into it, they're rock and roll. Now that's just one skill. There's a ballpark of 50 skills to learn, and those, when combined, lead into specialties. So, similar to music, each specialty would require a one-time use item or a tool to perform. Want to identify an item? Great! Level up the item knowledge, mineralogy, and herbology skills. Now get some spectacles as the consumable because clearly you're going to be slamming your face into the item in order to identify it. These glasses aren't going to be able to withstand the force of your face smashing into the herb at full speed. Is your identify specialty not high enough level? Well, stock up on spectacles because it's going to fail a lot. Are you at max level? Well, still buy a ton of spectacles, because anecdotally, the fail rate in this game seems really high. I spent like 10 minutes and 30 spectacles trying to identify a single herb at the end game. That herb was useless for the record, but the question mark of an unidentified item haunted me. Exhausted yet? Well, too bad. There's a little bit more to this system. You see, some characters might not have an innate talent, but are able to acquire it if they do enough of it. So let's say Perichi doesn't have listening. Well, good news. If she composes music for a while, she might actually pick it up. Oh, you'll also notice that different skills have different stat boosts. So for example, leveling your knife skill will increase your strength. All this stuff is probably starting to sound like a lot right now. And there's probably even more that I haven't touched on. But suffice to say, the game isn't as bad as it seems because it will drip feed you this information using manuals. So as you visit each town, you'll purchase new manuals and slowly unlock your skill set. That'll prevent you from doing overpowered crafting shenanigans too early, but it's still a massive part of the game. It's not something you could really avoid. So if engaging with these kind of systems isn't your thing, make sure to have a guide handy. However, to put all this into perspective, if you like playing a game using wacky systems, I have wonderful news for you. This game is super malleable using crafting. And honestly, it feels like it's supposed to be. The creators clearly wanted to reward those who explored the game's depth. It's awesome if you're into complicated systems. By far, its biggest flaw is that it's not easy to navigate. The menus and UI can't do much to support the weight of the massive cogs turning under the hood. Your talents, specialties, and skills are all on their own screens and you can't just tab through them. You make things one at a time, and each time you have to watch a full, unexciting animation of a circle slowly expand and increase in opacity before you found out if you succeeded or failed. It's all a little too clunky for as much depth as it has, but it will reward that time with really cool game-breaking items. But I'd say we've spent a lot of time on crafting, so let's get back to our adventure. So where was I? Right. I need to clean out the King of Mua's basement. There's monsters in here, and the king promises you the emblem if you can clear out the source. I feel like the kingdoms of this world have a lot of weird basement stuff going on, but I'm not going to harp on it this time. Inside the basement, though, there are aptly named luxurious weapons, which have powerful stat lines, but we're informed we cannot take them with us out of the basement, on account of them being priceless family heirlooms. Anytime you exit the dungeon to visit the inn or resupply, the luxurious weapons will be quickly confiscated from you, and you're going to need to dig them back out of the treasure chests you found them in originally, and then re-equip them back to your characters. It's serious business, it's their treasure. I mean, it means a lot to them, so let's steal them. How do we do that, you ask? Using the power of crafting, we can change a luxurious sword while in the dungeon. Luxurious sword? We know nothing of the sort. You see, we taped some ore to it, and now it's a dueling sword. This is a super powerful sword with in-game stat lines that you can get just by making sure you have the right skills when you get here. Now, I know this is like going to the Louvre, painting an eye patch on the Mona Lisa, and then saying, there's nothing in the rules that says I can't steal eye patch Mona Lisa, but it does seem to work. Logic aside, this is a really cool place to reward you if you grinded the correct skills, which I had accidentally done for Roddick, so I did get to leave with one cool new sword. As I mentioned earlier, this dungeon gave me some issues, so I had to grind here quite a few levels before I tackled it. The dungeon eventually became a breeze, but I was shocked that it threw this big of a difficulty spike at me. Enemies were nearly one-shotting me when I first entered. And yeah, that probably should have been my clue to go somewhere else first. The dungeon, however, isn't really remarkable in any way outside of the succubus in the basement who you need to beat up to get the monsters to stop pouring in. The King of Moi is grateful for our help and rewards us with his emblem and another chunk of lore. There's only one emblem left in the frigid north of Van. Oh, more backtracking. Luckily, we can get the ultimate transportation system, the ultimate in transit luxury, and it's been right in front of our noses the whole time. That's right. How could we not see this coming? It was clearly the showing feet rabbit. Through a private action with everyone's favorite cat girl, Parichi, we're led to discover that the statue being swapped out by two merchants at the beginning, the very beginning of the game, was in fact a living, breathing creature that turns to stone when it's tired. In the merchant's defense, I don't think they know it's alive. But what if they do? Deep moral questions about selling a sleepy rabbit aside, Parichi is able to wake up her rabbit friend and get him to help us out. We score the bunny whistle, which will let us summon him from anywhere on the world map. And what do we think of the big bunny?
Yeah, he's stubby and chubbly and wubbly and like 2 scoops of ice cream. And he's a rabbit too.
You're darn right. The rabbit's actually probably one of the most helpful items in the game. Not only does he keep you from having any random encounters as you journey on the overworld map, Bunny will let you skip mandatory things like caves and mountains if possible. So for example, with the trip from Hot to Portmouth, I had to go through Mount Matorix every single time. Now, entering with Bunny, I am instantly skipping the mountain and able to just continue on my way. Thank you, Bunny, you big-footed king. You really are.
Cute!
So with Bunny on our side, going back to where we were is much more approachable, and even better still, we will reach the frozen north and get the last bit of our lore and emblems. But before we can go to the frozen north, we're going to take one tiny detour to this random shack in the middle of the woods to get our final teammate, Welch. She's a staple of the series. She's new for the remake of the game, but has appeared in every subsequent Star Ocean in one form or another. She might be an immortal being. I really don't know a lot about her. The game is very vague on purpose. It seems like she's just omnipotent. She seems to know about the main characters of the game and is building futuristic machines in her cabin in the middle of nowhere and is kind of flirty with Roddick, so she's not given as much time to be as fleshed out as the others, but it seems like she's more of a token cameo in this title. As soon as I crossed into the frozen north, I realized I was supposed to go here before Moi. The enemies here would have been perfect to gain levels against instead of slowly killing 2 enemies at a time in the basement, then going to the inn. I did that over and over again. I did that for so long. Anyway, now that I'm sad, we're off to the saddest town ever, Durst, and there is literally nothing to do here. Durst is a frontier town just south of the nearby castle of Sullivan. While Sullivan has fortified walls and soldiers to protect it, nothing protects Durst from the raids from the Archfiend, so this is a very bleak little town. Everyone here seems to live an unhappy, destitute life. This is the first time the game shows you any evidence of Asmodeus actually harming humans in the world. One bright spot is when the private actions here allow for us to help a sweet little girl build a snowman. I thought it was a nice touch to have a bright spot in the middle of an otherwise bleak town. She's able to find joy in the small moments even as the world around her is falling apart. It helps humanize the world a little bit and give us higher stakes to fighting the Archfiend, which we've desperately needed up to this point. We travel a bit further north to the castle city of Silverland, and it's time we found the king. Oh good, this city's even sadder than Durst. Well, maybe not that bad. They have castle walls and soldiers to protect them from the Archfiend at least. Reflecting this is Silverland's militaristic design. It's a castle town, fortified to defend against the clearly more harsh conditions of living so close to Asmodeus' base of operations. Martial law seems to be the order of the day here. The residents have strict curfews and are under constant threat from demon invasion. Some JRPGs shoot for cozy towns in the snow, but not the case here with Star Ocean. There is a bit of levity here though. This guard's protecting a cat snowman. I love that for him. Oh, and I guess Santa's here. I mean, not just someone with that name, but the jolly old elf himself for some reason. He's here selling illicit goods behind a tree. Times are tough. He's selling his shoes. Oh no, Santa, I'm sorry. This is terrible news. So we meet with the king and he's very cool about the whole situation. He just gives us his emblem and more lore. No basement to clean, nothing like that. It looks like there's an entrance to the demon world that's just a short sail away from Silverland. Having someone called the Archfiend that close to your house is probably why things are in such bad shape up here in the north. At this point we have a really clear picture of how the lore is shaking out, but I'm going to wait till the King of Van gives us his final bit and just do it all at once and make it more digestible for you. Oh, and he makes it so all ports connect to one another. So that's nice. It's more appropriately leveled monsters and easier transportation. I'm beginning to think that I made a mistake when I went south first. Why did they let me
Why did they let me choose? I spent so much time grinding in the treasury. Oh well, that's an oopsie. Now we're going back to the King of An, and I can't help but wonder if it would have been easier if he had everyone come to him so we could all just talk about it together. Wishes aside, it took several hours and was mostly backtracking, but we've done it. We completed all the emblems and got all the lore. Now we can put together all these little tidbits that the kings gave us and begin to form a slightly more complete story on what happened in the past that led to our current situation. So, it goes like this. Long ago, the residents of Moi didn't originally have tails or pointy ears. In fact, those who arrived were much more rounded ears and were very human-like. They were never children either. They just appeared as adults. They knew things people on Roke did not, and with their knowledge, they created a relic called the Eye of Truth. This would allow them to open up dimensions to new worlds and see things beyond normal sight. However, something went wrong, and they instead contacted the demon realm using the eye. This tear in reality showed the demons where the people of Roke lived and allowed the demons to pour out, all at the behest of their leader, the Archfiend. The original tide of demons was driven back thanks to the combined efforts of everyone on Roke, so the Eye of Truth was real, and the non-corporeal ladies in the Purgatorium lied to us. That's kinda rude. The king's bit of lore says that the eye is housed in the Purgatorium. Well, that's what we heard too, so I guess it's not a very well-kept secret. But whatever the case, we're gonna go give those incorporeal ladies a piece of our mind because, darn it, we asked them about this once already. One trip through the same dungeon with the same enemies in the same floor gumdrops later, and we are back in front of the incorporeal ladies. I hope they're ready because I'm mad. We demand to see their manager. But this time they notice we have all the cool emblems and they're much more accommodating. They call us the successor to Moi's destiny and warp us into a techie-looking lab. Looks like the ancient people of Moi weren't magical, they were in fact possessing cool sci-fi stuff. And they sent us into the true chamber of the Purgatorium, a winding dungeon with a lot of keycards and a lot of sci-fi computers and tech stuff. And I know I'm beginning to sound like a broken record, but this dungeon is also fairly unremarkable in its mechanics. However, it does set itself apart by having a very cool setting with all of the techie, gizmo-y stuff going on. Ooh. Once we collect our last keycard, we're led into the final chamber. This is a repository of knowledge for all the things the Moi people knew in ancient times, and they're about to dish. You see, the people of Moi once lived on the 8th continent on Earth, Mu. But if that was on Earth, why haven't Ronix and Ilya heard of it? Well, that's because the entire continent, every bit of it, got sucked into a vortex when a meteor struck Earth. This sent the people of Moi through time and space, sending them across the universe to the planet of Roke. Now obviously that's not the ideal place to be if you miss Earth, so the people of Moi decided that they would combine their technology with the Rokian use of symbology and create the Eye of Truth. They would then use the eye to open space-time to create a portal to get them back home to Earth. But we already know how that went. They accidentally opened up a portal into the demon realm. They just wanted to go home, not terrorize a planet with demons from another dimension. So they used their technology to help repel the demon invasion and decided it wasn't worth the risk of putting anyone else in danger. So they gave up on their dream to return home. They locked their technology away, here in the inner sanctum of the Purgatorium. However, they knew something might arise where they'd need to use it again, so here we are, and now it's time to entrust it to us. The old man hologram that's been walking us through all of this then presents us with the Eye of Truth. This will allow us to enter the demon realm and finally face Asmodeus. The game generously warps us directly back to the King of An, and we let him know we're ready to commence wailing on Asmodeus. But unfortunately, a demon spider lady like the one we killed in Astral shows up with a message. Well, a very visual message. She lets us know the Archfiend has completed a new technology and quickly shows it off. You remember Durst? You know, the sad little town with the little girl full of innocence and hope at the same time that we built a snowman with, and it was very touching? Well, Asmodeus blows it up with a laser cannon as an example of his power. We run to check on the town. There are no survivors. Did it kill the little girl with the snowman? Yes. Yes, it did. Thank you, game. I was hoping you'd make me feel like garbage about getting to build a snowman, so at least we have a good reason to fight Asmodeus, I guess. Emotionally manipulative. No more distractions. Asmodeus has an orbital laser or something. They don't really explain how the weapon works, but it's not really important because he can destroy whole towns. So it's off to the demon realm, and 2 steps in, it's Crimson Shield? Everyone's favorite classic character. He had lines like, well, he's here. So he is bad, and I think if I had brought Mavel and Yoshua to this point, the fight would have made a lot of sense. We would have had some context and maybe some closure, but instead we fight him. I'd honestly forgotten he existed. Turns out that Crimson Shield sought a powerful artifact to give him more strength, but it was in fact cursed and made him a puppet of the demon realm. Again, I can't stress how much more this would mean if I had Mavel here. It looks like hitting him to the point of death brought him back to his normal, uncursed state, so in his dying words he warns us that Astral Castle is under attack. An artifact from the first Demon War is housed there, and Asmodeus' forces want to destroy it, so we're gonna need to go back. Just as my soul was shriveling at the thought of more backtracking, Millie very mindfully points out that we own something called the Eye of Truth that can bend space-time, and it just warps us there. Okay, fine. Demon Realm, we'll be back. So after vaguely seeing the start of the Demon Realm, we are back to Astral City. And wouldn't you know it, the place is just absolutely under invasion. I'm talking monsters everywhere. One of which is the spider lady who delivered the message before blowing Durs off the map. We fight her and her entourage and clean the city up. As a reward, Ceus's dad pulls us aside and talks to us about the ancient weapon he's been guarding. Whoa, Ceus's dad looks way cooler than Ceus. Why can't I recruit him? Look at him. He has an eye patch, and his eye patch looks so cool, what the heck? Oh, I think the whole cast should have eye patches now. I'm very pro eye patch after seeing how cool Lord Leus looks. Anyway, Leus says that he has the artifact called the Bladeless Sword. He used it in the last Demon War, and what do you know? It's a beam sword. I bet Leus looked so cool with his eye patch and his beam sword. Ugh. He gives us the beam sword to keep, which isn't as good as the one that we borrowed from the Moi treasury, but it's really the gesture that counts. Hey though, we saved the day, so it's back off to the Demon Realm for real this time. Like for real. Like we get to see it. I promise. Okay, 2 bosses and 1 needlessly long walk back, and we're back in the Demon Realm. This is a relatively straightforward area with nice, pokey, demonic space rocks and a decent atmosphere. It's got some nice set dressing for the approach to what feels like a penultimate fight. I'm really excited to see the game start to deliver on its promise of sci-fi from the beginning a little more. Between this and the last dungeon, we're really starting to see those elements mix. This sci-fantasy sandwich is really coming together. Speaking of sci-fi, it's not long before we wander into the Archfiend Asmodeus' lab inside of the Demon Realm. This place is called the Space-Time Lab. That's very specific. Good on him for naming the only building here. And this place has Evil Lab written all over it. There's tubes everywhere, the lighting is mostly sinister, and it's definitely twisting and turning. The lab itself is in working order, but it doesn't really feel like it's at 100% capacity. Some tubes are broken and areas are in disarray. There's clearly been a toll since the last Demon War, but the lab is running enough to start doing horrible things. There's technology all over, and monsters you fought prior are floating around kind of sinisterly in containment tubes. It seems like Asmodeus has been breeding pretty much all the monsters you've encountered in Rogue. This guy's a bummer. Now, this dungeon, the Space-Time Laboratory, is perhaps my least favorite up to this point, mostly due to the fact that the camera on the pre-rendered backgrounds will very occasionally change perspectives between screens. The game does this in a lot of places, but it's especially hard to deal with here. When you shift the perspective, it's very hard to get your bearings. The future smoothness of the dungeon combined with the lack of sight lines and clear objects in the distance make it very difficult to tell where you're being oriented. Usually, with rare exception, the closer you get to the end in an older JRPG, the more they'll try and make the dungeons longer in order to emphasize the danger, which would in turn make the dungeon more challenging because it requires more item management and preservation on your end. However, this dungeon is long and twists around itself on accident thanks to the perspective changes. That makes this a little difficult, but also mostly frustrating. I would imagine the Super Famicom version of this game would lack that issue. Having that top-down perspective would make it far less likely for you to lose your bearings, and it would cut out a lot of that frustration. But as it stands, we muddle through and find Asmodeus, the Archfiend, in maybe one of the more awkward introductions of a big villain I've ever seen. You see, we're going to try and log into this computer to get some info, and we're treated to this.
Rokians, what is your business here?
To kill Asmodeus, of course.
You really ought to know what he looks like before you say that. For Asmodeus would be none other than I.
Wow, Roddick, you gotta learn to be a little bit more subtle than that, my guy. Then, Asmodeus, having a real penchant for drama, goes a teensy bit further into the dungeon. Not a lot, just enough to make you walk more. He clearly likes playing hard to get. It's been a very long journey to this point, so I'd say we're ready to face down our ultimate evil, the literal Lord of Demons. Maybe he'll explain to us why he has all this future technology. We confront Asmodeus, and it's time to get a monologue explaining what he's up to. You see, he's a sexy villain. Monologuing is clearly in his blood. These guys crave the monologue. And the answer we get is, he's not 100% sure. He's feeling compelled to be cruel and nice at the same time, and he's obsessed with the idea of power and using it to show others what true power means. So absolute is his commitment to the idea that power is everything that he's not even worried about it if we're stronger, because that means we're more powerful and we get to tell him what to do. I mean, in this case, he'd be dead, so he wouldn't really have a say. I guess that's his point, though. Vaguely evil to the very end, I suppose. Asmodeus' fight is a fun one, as he has access to really high-level spells and he's super mobile. It made him tough to pin down for my usual technique, which is spam moves until the opponent is stun locked. Finally, after using a lot of resurrection potions and casting a lot of heal, he'll fall. We did it. There's no time to rest, however. Literally as he hits the ground, 5 super soldiers warp in, get a sample of his blood, and then warp out. Ronix lets us know that this is all according to plan. You see, they have to take it because if they don't take it, then the time that happened in the future won't happen, so it would make a paradox. We shrug this off as we have all our other time stuff and then get in line to get our sample of Asmodeus right afterward. Now, if we're being honest, Asmodeus is not the best villain I've ever seen in a video game. You don't even see his face until you almost fight him. And the only evidence that he exists outside of people talking about him is when he completely erases Durs off the map. I really wish they had done more to flesh out Asmodeus. Giving him more time to explain his motivations would have been good, as well as more opportunities for him to pester our heroes. A good villain makes heroes more heroic, and without him around to do that, we don't really get to understand the stakes of what's going on. Asmodeus didn't quite live up to Big Bad, but that's okay because now we have the cure for Dorn. We visit the King of Van, and he's happy, for obvious reasons. He gives us an ending speech that feels like peace is on the way for the world of the past. We've set things right. No more killing cute children in villages using orbital beams. Not wanting to explain to our party all the ins and outs of the time travel stuff, we use the Eye of Truth to return to our own time in the middle of the night, nice and clean. We'll never forget what they did to Hell, but it's better to have a quick goodbye than very likely confuse the daylights out of them. It's a lot of work to explain the future and time travel, and that you have to go. Can you imagine what a headache that would be? Hanging out with someone for a couple months or whatever and having an adventure, and then the day before they leave they drop some stuff about being from the future and other planets? I'd say the slip out in the night seems reasonable. We do note that it's odd there was a super advanced civilization on Roke and in the demon world, but it's insane not to think an advanced race would teleport to the demon world in the same fashion the Moab people did to Roke. But hey, we killed the guy who knew the answer to that, so let's go back and cure Dorn. How did they know they were going to use the eye to get back? Whatever. We restored Dorn to health and we get to see him again for the first time in the 20 hours it took us to get this far. It's good to be back with friends. We bid Ronix and Ilya farewell as they go back to Earth. Turns out the whole time violation thing didn't get him in trouble. The Admiral decided to keep it their little secret so everyone can get back to living a happy life on their own planets. The end. JRPGs, am I right? I think the genre gets a lot of flack for a couple things, and to be clear, some of those critiques are valid. One thing I notice come up a lot is pacing. I suspect that's because most JRPGs don't always stick the landing in the third act. That's not to say they're bad, it's more that they don't fit into a traditional story structure. You see, JRPGs have a lot of time to cover, but a very simple premise. You have escalating threats until you very likely kill the ultimate evil. There's some plot twists in there, but for the most part, it's a pretty straightforward path. But some JRPGs, especially modern ones, will tout runtimes of 70 to 100 hours. I'll save my feelings on games of that length for another time, but suffice to say, any traditional story with a beginning, a middle, and an end would begin to buckle with that sort of runtime. So the genre tends to play out a little closer to a season or even a couple seasons of a TV show or an anime with one overarching premise. In fact, it's very like anime, but you gotta do battles every now and then. In terms of storytelling, character relationships get emphasized and plot twists thrown in occasionally to keep you invested. If a traditional arc represents a story's path from beginning to end, JRPGs tend to look a little bit more like a wave. They'll stray off the path a little, sometimes even a lot. When you do it right, it's very charming. It can make the game endearing. Why do I mention this now? Well, because this game doesn't end at what feels like should be the ending. It just kind of keeps going. Yes, this content applies to the story, but it really exists to flesh out the lore of the world and close a couple loose ends it had before. But I think it's the way they tell this part that feels a little too out of left field. It feels more like it rolls casually to these plot beats rather than escalates up to them, and I think we can lay that at the feet of the game doing a rather poor job of establishing a strong central villain in order to keep the stakes high, or the player invested. What we instead get is Ronix and Ilya returning to Earth to a relative plot bonanza. So remember the third party? They had the ship in the past, they made the pathogen. Well, having their people turned to stone plot foiled, they now have a whole fleet emerge from a wormhole and demand the surrender of Earth. They're the soldiers we saw warp in to get that sweet, sweet Asmodeus blood 300 years ago. Turns out these people are from a planet called Fargate. Fargate demands Earth's surrender. I guess they forget to tell you about this place. Go ahead and add a pun to the point board, please. Thank you very much. Anyway, Fargate is capable of reaching Earth using a wormhole, but this acts as a two-way street that lets us get to them. Their leader, the tyrannical G.A. Revorse, who is definitely evil, needs to be destroyed. Star Ocean does a lot of telling and not a lot of showing when it comes to introducing villains, but GA is bad, so there's a resistance trying to get rid of him. He's also got technology which makes him impervious to guns and modern weaponry. Well, this can only mean one thing. The Admiral tells Ronix he can use the time gate to get the band back together for one more job. We cut to Roddick, Dorn, and Millie all enjoying the peace and quiet of their town. This scene mirrors the beginning of the game almost to a T. I would think they would be hugely different people now, but it looks like they went back to their old life pretty easily. Dorn is called off to Mount Maytorx to gather herbs, and no joke, the moment he's gone, Ronix and Ilya warp in and ask us if we're down for one more galaxy-saving romp. We're absolutely on board to assassinate Fargate's leader. Why not? We beam aboard the ship and everyone else from our party is there that we had ditched the night before. Absolutely no hard feelings about the leaving in the night thing. Don't even sweat it. Cius, Fia, Welch, and Perici are all ready to go. The gang's back together, and wouldn't you know it, it's time to save the universe. We arrive on the planet of Fargate with the coordinates given to us by the rebel faction on the surface, and it's an ambush. Half our party is captured right out the gate. Luckily, the other half of our party is quickly scooped up by the rebel leader and taken to safety in their hideout. Well, this is going terribly. Also, they took the healer, so I'm extra grouchy about that. It seems like G.A. Revorse had captured some rebels and tortured our location out of them, so at least we know he's villainous. It turns out our friends have been taken to a nearby prison. We need to break them out, and in order to make that happen, the rebels will stage action at the front door in order to lure the bulk of GA's forces away. Using that distraction, we'll sneak in and free the prisoners. Calling this segment a dungeon might be overselling it a bit. It's a couple hallways, but it's got cool robot sentinels and techie stuff. It doesn't take long before we free our friends and escape. The whole team is back together, and now we're ready to head back to the rebel base and figure out our plan of action. First things first, look at the rebel leader's amazing eye patch. Yes, that's right, more eye patches. We are truly all so lucky today. I don't think I would look good in an eye patch, or I don't think I've ever seen anyone look good in an eye patch, but the character art provided in this game really makes a compelling argument for having an eye patch. It looks like this planet has a lot of future tech that is on par with Earth. It has automated security bots, computers. It's certainly a developed planet. But the harsh conditions are horrible for the people living here. It's barren and lifeless. So how did the people of Fargate even manage to live here? Throughout our time here, we're going to get a much fuller picture of what happened at Fargate. You see, when Mu was struck by the asteroid that created the void in space-time, it sent people to a couple different places apparently, because some of them have ended up here in Fargate. Space-time rifts don't really worry about who goes where, I guess. The people of Fargate faced an uninhabitable planet, limited resources, and little in the way of hope for long-term survival. They needed to return to Earth, but first they needed to figure out how to not die on the planet they were currently on. So they began to experiment. They wanted to make people capable of surviving in the harsh climate of Fargate. Using their technology, they built biolabs, space-time labs. They went lab crazy. They even started messing with the good old human genome. The experiments finally yielded a superhuman, extra smart, extra driven, and capable of surviving the harsh world better than the average person. This someone was named Asmodeus. Hey, we know him. Now, a little editorializing on my part, it seems like Asmodeus was conflicted by his emotions because he was created in a lab as a leader and not given time to develop or understand his own feelings. He was too smart and too strong to be considered a normal human, and yet still full of conflicting and very human emotions he couldn't parse. You know, like when you can't pick where you want to go eat. Him being so confused by humanity explains why he gave us such poor reasons for him being the Archfiend in the first place. He wasn't sure of himself because he didn't understand his own feelings. Discontent with his lot in life, he used his superbrain to warp the entire space-time facility away from the planet of Fargate and ended up in what the Rokians now know as the Demon Realm. Well, that would explain why there was an entire lab there. A team of Fargetians? Fargonians? A team of soldiers from the planet Fargate were the ones who we saw warp in and steal his DNA. You see, when he got away, he took with him their major breakthrough in surviving the planet. They couldn't just leave him behind. They used his DNA as a basis for a second wave of superhumans. Each superhuman was given a role as a leader in their society to help guide the people home as they used their superbrains to help keep everyone else alive. One of those superhumans was GA. The catch, though, is that GA craved power, and maybe the others did too, but that's not an issue because he killed them, making himself dictator of the world. He then decided their long-awaited return to Earth would be as conquerors, not as returning friends. I would like to rescind my earlier joke about Fargate, as it is clear that this is a nod to them being a forgotten people, and that makes my pun earlier invalid. This was in fact just a thinly veiled metaphor, and I have failed you all. It is with quiet dignity that I ask you to remove my pun point from the pun board. So that provides us with enough backstory to give everything up to this point context, so it's time to enter the final dungeon. A little last bit of environmental storytelling as we sneak through an old decommissioned biodome in order to arrive at GA's stronghold, which is called Revorce Tower. It's cool to see the biodome because it clearly at one point was trying to grow plant life there to help sustain the world, but it's since fallen to ruin. This planet is harsh and adversarial to life. It can't even support plants that are engineered to grow there. Compared to the Rokians, they've had a terrible time of it here on Fargate. We also get a glimpse of how some people outside of the rebellion live. GA rules with a sense of cold, mathematical cruelty. Everyone gets exactly as much as they need, no more, no less. For the most part, the people are broken. They live joyless lives, and the only way to have anything in this world is to be part of GA's military. So it's time to tackle GA's Revorce Tower. This is an enormous tower standing between us and GA. 7 sprawling floors, which are all smooth and tech-like, samey, and incredibly easy to get lost in. This would be far less of a problem if the game didn't reuse backgrounds completely wholesale. I'm talking copy and pasting. Hallways on different floors look exactly the same. It's a copy-paste bonanza, especially when some of the puzzles require you to go up and then down again. Thankfully, I found it to be mostly linear and I didn't get too confused. There was only a couple spots where I got really confused. It's a shame because the battles are fun and the treasure is good. It just really kind of puts a sour note on the final dungeon of the game to see reused assets like this. After a lot of battles, surprisingly no mini-bosses, we reach the top floor. GA Revorce awaits. We burst through his chamber doors and finally get to meet our villain face to face. It's worth noting because this is the second major antagonist the game has presented us with, and the second one that we did not get to meet face to face until we were literally in their secret lair. That is wild. Now, GA is just sort of a guy. I think Asmodeus's look was a little more iconic and he had horns for some reason, but hey, this looks like a baseball dad with a DBZ scouter on, but also a 6-pack window built into his shirt. There's a lot going on here. But hey, let's let him monologue. He's a villain. Let's see if he gets spicy. Immediately you can tell the DNA from Asmodeus was used to create GA because he's also obsessed with the idea of power. In this case, he wants to kill humanity on Earth before he goes back as a big middle finger to the people who squandered its resources while he and others suffered on Fargate with none. And while yes, we did sorta maybe squander our resources even in the fictional world of Star Ocean, it's worth noting that that's not his call to make. He can't pretend to be God, and our characters immediately call him out on that behavior. But you know what he says to that?
If so, I will become that god. I've already laid hands on the creator role here. If being the creator of all things makes you a god, then all that remains is for me to take the throne for myself.
Never mind. We did it, folks. We're gonna go kill God. We're actually playing a JRPG now. Now it's official. So GA's fight is hard, like hard, like harder than the six-pack abs he has proudly on display. He casts huge AoEs that one-shot my level 70-something party, and then he wiped the floor with me instantly. I was a little discouraged. I was really doing okay in the tower, but his damage requires massive level grinding. It is a crazy difficulty spike. But, thankfully, crafting to the rescue. You see, with a character with the music exactly at level 4, you can summon an enemy that gives you huge amount of experience. And with your duplication skill, you can make an endless supply of EXP cards, an item that doubles your experience in battle. So big shout out to Google for saving me several hours of grinding. So when I came back to GA, I was level 90 and more than prepared. Your move, GA. But even then the fight was surprisingly rough. His damage is insane. He doesn't ever stagger and he moves around super fast. He's a JRPG boss too, so of course he's going to change form. So once we finally knock the human form down, he changes, even when it doesn't make sense why he would. I just assume his mutations go haywire, but it's never explained. He does a bunch of crazy mutating and turns into Neo-Revorce, and this is another tough fight. After a really long battle, we finally bring GA's final form down, and are rewarded with an anime battle cutscene. This is the end of the game, for real this time. We opened on anime, and we will close on anime. Time is a flat circle or whatever. This time we're given a true ending where all the characters will get individual vignettes. Depending on how you did with your friendships throughout the game, you'll get different scenes with your characters. No sneaking out in the night this time, everyone gets a real goodbye. This is a really good way to hit the mark for replayability because different character combinations can mean different endings for you, the player. This is where I imagine Star Ocean 2 got its 80+ endings to brag about on the back of the box. I was very curious to see what all the combinations looked like, but in my case, everyone said a tearful goodbye. Ilya kind of implied she liked me, Cius wanted to fight me. I did beat him for the record, even if he's my bro, I'm not gonna take it easy. Ronix said he respected me, and everybody else just kinda left. With that, the danger in the universe is set aside, and Millie and Rada can go back to living their life of peace on their home planet of Roke. The galaxy is at peace for the time being, at least until probably the next Star Ocean game if I were to guess. At the end of the day, a good word for Star Ocean is ambitious. That ambition's a little uneven though. Knowing that they pushed the memory limit on the cartridge for the Super Famicom release to fit voice makes a lot of sense, because I can feel some of those rough edges of corners cut to fit in vocals. For every cool plot twist comes a segment with backtracking that can be a little bit mind-numbing. For all the love they gave the setting, the lack of a central villain makes it hard for me to get any stakes for the story. For as rich and detailed as the crafting system is, it can be a little obtuse. But you know what? It really ends up working in the end because of all the passion that the developers brought to this title. You can really tell the team at Tri-Ace had a lot of ideas that they were excited to share with the world that they couldn't apply to Tales of Phantasia. But here they are letting all their crazy ideas run amok and seeing if they work. And for the most part they do. One of the founding principles I have for this channel is not bringing games to it that I hate. I don't want to spend the time and energy discussing something I don't enjoy. I think there's value in critiquing things that aren't good, but it's not worth my effort for what I'm doing here. I think what I am good with talking about is flawed experiences. Games that take big swings but maybe miss a couple of them. Those games tend to stick with me a lot longer than big GOTY contenders. They have the courage to make something new, flaws and all, and as a result, show me something that I might never have seen before, or even show it to me in a light I hadn't considered. But more remarkable still is that Star Ocean is trying so many big things and still manages to mostly stick the landing. Now, of course, future games have taken some of the ideas we've seen here in Star Ocean and made them much more enjoyable or smoother game experiences for the player. Would we have the Atelier games without Star Ocean? Maybe, I can't say. But I can say that Star Ocean was bold, ambitious, and ahead of its time. And so while it might be a flawed experience, it's still an important one. I think I took a big bite with this video, but I'm glad I got to see it through. I just want to thank you so much for hanging out with me this whole time, or however long you watched. Honestly, if you watched any amount of this video, that means the world to me. It was super fun to make, even if it was a bit scary to put into the world and also kind of scary to edit. This was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. If you liked the video, feel free to leave a like and/or subscribe. That would mean the world to me. But also comments telling me how I didn't craft right are apropos. Thank you so much and have a great day.